Hello, friends. I'm going to do a reading today from Thus Spake Zarathustra, a book for all and none by Friedrich Nietzsche. Thus Spake Zarathustra is a philosophical novel by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, composed in 4 parts between 1883 and 1885 and published between 1883 and 1891. The book chronicles the fictitious travels and speeches of Zarathustra. Zarathustra's namesake was the founder of Zoroastrianism, usually known in English as Zoroaster. Nietzsche is clearly portraying a new or different Zarathustra, one who turns traditional morality on its head. He goes on to characterize what the name of Zarathustra means in my mouth, the mouth of the first immoralist. For what constitutes the tremendous historical uniqueness of that Persian is just the opposite of this. Zarathustra was the first to consider the fight of good and evil, the very wheel in the machinery of things. The transposition of morality into the metaphysical realm as a farce, cause, and an end in itself is his work. Zarathustra created the most calamitous error, morality. Consequently, he must also be the first to recognize it. His doctrine, and his alone, posits truthfulness as the highest virtue. This means the opposite of the cowardice of the idealist who flees from reality. Am I understood? The self-overcoming of morality out of truthfulness, the self-overcoming of the moralist into his opposite, into me. That is what the name of Zarathustra means in my mouth. Nietzsche, Ecce Homo, why I am a destiny. I think Nietzsche certainly felt he was a prophet, and he may be, but not a prophet so much, I think, predicting the future as clearly seeing where we are and where we're heading. And I think in that he has a lot to consider. Just if you can bear with me for a few minutes, I want to tell a little personal story that kind of connects to this theme that's been coming up for the last few days for me. It's December 11th, 2020, Friday, and we've been through a horrible election in our country, in the United States, and people are very angry right now over the Supreme Court decision. And a lot of the folks that support President Trump, who is, in my opinion, doing some very dangerous things right now, playing with people's emotions and their very fragile minds. Those folks that follow him, I grew up in those communities, working class on the East Coast of the United States in Virginia, and I have a Hispanic name, so it kind of brought some attention in the country town that we lived in, that I grew up in. And while I was growing up in that town, in this little country town in Virginia, kind of right smack in the middle, my mother, in my teenage years, had taken us to an evangelical church, and so I became a Christian, and I was practicing, not just a Christian, okay, but a United States American evangelical, and a charismatic, and going to a church also that was considered charismatic, so a charismatic evangelical church. And you can, if you don't have direct experience with that, you can find all sorts of interesting examples. But that group of people I understand very well, at least until I left my personal faith, Christianity, and which, in a very real way, I think the drama that's playing out in the world played out in my family. In that the female members of my family, my direct immediate family, um, all have become Christians, and my mother and sister have practiced in their Christianity for a long time. Um, and they've become very upset at me for leaving the faith, the black sheep, so to speak. I'm actually not a sheep, I'm a goat, but a smelly goat to be exact. A little too smelly for them. And the last 5 years, as I've lived my life, I've kind of gone through an individuation process, and there's really not much I can say about it. But I can say that I do have and have found myself a love of philosophy, and not so metaphysics, but more than, I'm not an academic, or I do not have scholarly interests. My interest in philosophy has always been, how then can I live in this world? And so it's always been a practical, pragmatic exercise, practicing philosophy for myself. I have my ups and downs. I have a very strong personality that I've learned to let relax, or I should say, I've learned to relax. And learning to relax is really letting your confusion go. So, what does all this have to do with Zarathustra in Nietzsche? Well, there's something I read a few years ago. I read a lot of this book. I didn't finish it, but the beginning really stood out to me recently, given all of the drama going on in our elections in our country. Right now, our country is at each other's throats. There's one side that's very angry, and I think they're capable of a lot more physical violence than we maybe expected. And I think both sides are capable of great violence. And the leadership in this country has tried, on the Republican side, has been trying for a coup. And probably there's political reasons they're doing what they're doing for advantage, but they are fueled by the group of people that I grew up with, the evangelical Christians. And this is, as over the last 5 years, I examined my old faith, and I examined the beliefs of that church, and I looked into the historical roots of what I had believed, and I didn't become an atheist. I'm not an existentialist, but I definitely veered into existential territory, and Nietzsche was there waiting for me, and I was easy prey. And I do love his writing, and I think more than anything, what I read in Nietzsche was a warning, and this is what reminded me recently of what's happening, a great warning about the last man, who, a lot of people think Nietzsche is a nihilist, and he is nothing of the sort. He warned of nihilism. He saw the coming danger that the Industrial Revolution was opening up in technology, and he knew that religion was dying, or God was dead. And I mean, what he meant by that was those religious systems were not going to serve us into the future the way that we hoped that they would. And actually, they were causing a lot of harm in the world due to their apocalyptic or nihilistic, ironically, visions of the world. I mean, the Christians and the Catholics of the world are waiting for Jesus to return, and that type of faith and belief can minimize or just the world around the view and care for the world around us. But there are certainly religious people who think we certainly have to love one another, try to love one another, and they try to emulate their their Savior, Jesus, and try to love. Jesus had some confusing words about violent words, and then he had very compassionate words. And I think there's probably, through my own study, and there's certainly some reasons why there's things added and a lot of accounts kind of jumbled together, and so we don't really know what Jesus actually said. I think we get, if he, or even if he was actually alive, he could be a myth, or an amalgamation of different people back then. I don't really have an exhaustive opinion about or deep opinion about it. Um, I look at it as philosophical. I look at the New Testament as a statement that represents our consciousness at a point in time. And to me, it is, I never, as a Christian growing up, saw the Bible as inerrant. I never bought the hook, line, and sinker, the idea of authority, unquestionable authority, or that these men represented, or church leaders represented me, and somehow were my shepherds. I was always a little rebellious when it came to the church, and especially to judgment and heaven and hell. And I just, I that was never. Yeah, I read a guy say, "Love your brother, your neighbor as yourself," and I thought that's profound. And that was the original reason I think I became a Christian as a young man. So, but what is all this? Again, bringing this back to my topic, this this the eschatology of Christianity and other religions prophesy and predict the end of our culture and our world and the coming of a new world and with a new body. And that is really, I don't have a problem with what anybody believes, but when they take those beliefs and begin to push them and project them into the world, I think we do need to stand up and speak up and say and try to be voices of reason and peace. But in this world, in this political economy right now, or environment, there isn't a lot of talking going on, and I really don't know where it's going to lead. Um, so that's interesting. But I think I see parallels with Nietzsche and what he was afraid of, and I feel I in a way kind of took up his path of the camel and the lion and the dragon, um, and sparked a creativity and a passion for life and quality of my life, and deepening my focus where I was and on each step. And what I read in the prologue here in Nietzsche's Zarathustra, and I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction, that his sister had written. By the way, I'll post links to this. This is from Project Gutenberg's Thus Spake Zarathustra copy. So thankfully, we have these great resources available for free still. There's a lot. You can even find, I'll also post a link to an audiobook that's quite good, much better than I'll ever read anything. So I'm certainly not out here representing myself as a good as a good audiobook actor. I'll just let I'll let the words speak for themselves here. I'll let Nietzsche speak for himself and his sister, and maybe I'll talk a little bit after I read some of the prologue and the introduction, and then yeah, I'll wrap it up. So this is the introduction by Miss Forster Nietzsche. How Zarathustra came into being. Zarathustra is my brother's most personal work. It is the history of his most individual experiences, of his friendships, ideals, raptures, bittersweet disappointments, and sorrows. Above it all, however, there soars, transfiguring it, the image of his greatest hopes and remotest aims. My brother had the figure of Zarathustra in his mind from his very earliest youth. He once had told me that even as a child he had dreamt of him. By the way, that reminds me quite a bit of Carl Jung in Philemon, and basically that figure represented his interface to his unconscious, and in a way represents Socrates' diamond as well, or which Augustine called our conscience. Um, Continuing. At different periods in his life, he would call this haunter of his dreams by different names, but in the end, he declares in a note on the subject, I had to do a Persian the honor of identifying him with this creature of my fancy. Persians were the first to take a broad and comprehensive view of history. Every series of evolutions, according to them, was presided over by a prophet, and every prophet had his Hazar, his dynasty of 1,000 years. All Zarathustra's views, as also his personality, were early conceptions of my brother's minds. Whoever reads his posthumously public writings from the years 1869 to 1882 with care will constantly meet with passages suggestive of Zarathustra's thoughts and doctrines. For instance, the ideal of the Superman is put forth quite clearly in all his writings during the years 1873 to 75, and in We Philologists, the following remarkable observations occur. How can one praise and this is from Nietzsche. How can one praise and glorify a nation as a whole? Even among the Greeks, it was the individuals that counted. The Greeks are interesting and extremely important because they reared such a vast number of great individuals. How is this possible? The question is one which ought to be studied. This question is one which ought to be studied. I am interested only in the relations of a people to the rearing of the individual man, and among the Greeks the conditions were unusually favorable for the development of the individual, not by any means owing to the goodness of the people, but because of the struggles of their evil instincts. With the help of favorable measures, great individuals might be reared who would be both different from and higher than those who hitherto have owed their existence to mere chance. Here we may still be hopeful in the rearing of exceptional men. The notion of rearing the Superman is only a new form of an ideal Nietzsche already had in his youth, that the object of mankind should lie in its highest individuals, or as he writes in Schopenhauer as educator, mankind ought constantly to be striving to produce great men. And I have to say women, of course. But this and nothing else is its duty. But the ideals he most revered in those days are no longer held to be the highest types of men. No, around this future ideal of a coming humanity, the Superman, the poet spread the veil of becoming. Who can tell to what glorious heights man can still ascend? That is why, after having tested the worth of our noblest ideal, that of the Savior, in the light of the new valuations, the poet cries with passionate emphasis in Zarathustra, Never yet hath there been a Superman, naked have I seen before them the greatest and the smallest man. All too similar are they still to each other. Verily, even the greatest found I all too human. The phrase, the rearing of the Superman, has very often been misunderstood. By the word rearing in this case is meant the act of modifying by means of new and higher values, values which, as laws and guides of conduct and opinion, are now to rule over mankind. In general, the doctrine of the Superman can only be understood correctly in conjunction with other ideas of the authors, such as the order of rank, the will to power, and the transvaluation of all values. He assumes that Christianity, as a product of the resentment of the botched and the weak, has put in ban all that is beautiful, strong, proud, powerful, in fact, all the qualities resulting from strength, and that in consequence all forces which tend to promote or elevate life have been seriously undermined. Now, however, a new table of valuations must be placed over mankind, namely that of the strong, mighty, and magnificent man, overflowing with life and elevated to his zenith, the Superman, who is now put forth as with overpowering passion as the aim of our life, hope, and will. And just as the old system of valuing, which only extolled the qualities favorable to the weak, the suffering, and the oppressed, has succeeded in producing a weak, suffering, and modern race. So this new and reverse system of valuing ought to rear a healthy, strong, lively, and courageous type, which would be a glory to life itself. Stated briefly, the leading principle of this new system of valuing would be all that proceeds from power is good, all that springs from weakness is bad. Now, power is not authority, I want to say here. That power does not come from the state or an individual or a god or religion. That power he's talking about is from yourself. And it comes from standing with yourself, which is kind of a cone and a riddle that I won't explain because I don't understand it. And what do I know? This type must not be regarded as a fanciful figure. It is not nebulous hope which is to be realized at some indefinitely remote period, thousands of years hence, nor is it a new species in the Darwinian sense, of which we can know nothing, and which it would therefore be somewhat absurd to strive after. But it is meant to be a possibility which men of the present could realize with all their spiritual and physical energies, provided they adopted the new values. The author of Zarathustra never lost sight of that egregious example of a transvaluation of all values through Christianity, whereby the whole of the deified mode of life and thought of the Greeks, as well as strong Romedom, was almost annihilated or transvalued in a comparatively short time. Could not a rejuvenated Greco-Roman system of valuing, once it had been defined and made more profound by the schooling which 2,000 years of Christianity had provided, affect another such revolution within a calculable period of time until that glorious type of manhood shall finally appear, which is to be our new faith and hope, and in the creation of which Zarathustra exhorts us to participate? In his private notes on the subject, the author uses the expression Superman, always in the singular by the by, as signifying the most thoroughly well-constituted type, as opposed to modern man. Above all, however, he designates Zarathustra himself as an example of the Superman. And ecce homo, he is careful to enlighten us concerning the precursors and prerequisites to the advent of this highest type, and referring to a certain passage in the Gay Science. In order to understand this type, we must first be quite clear in regard to the leading physiological condition on which it depends. This condition is what I call great healthiness. I know not how to express my meaning more plainly or more personally than I have done already in one of the last chapters, aphorism 382 of the 5th book of the Gay Science. We, the new, the nameless, the hard to understand, it says there, we firstlings of a yet untried future, we require for a new and also a new means, namely, a new healthiness, stronger, sharper, tougher, bolder, and merrier than all healthiness hitherto. He whose soul longeth to participate the whole range of hitherto recognized values and desirabilities, and to circumnavigate all the coasts of this ideal Mediterranean Sea, who from the adventures of his most personal experience wants to know how it feels to be a conqueror and discoverer of the ideal, as likewise how it is with the artist, the saint, the legislator, the sage, the scholar, the devotee, the prophet, and the godly nonconformist of the old style, requires one thing about all for that purpose: great healthiness. Such healthiness as one not only possesses, but also constantly acquires and must acquire, because one unceasingly sacrifices it again and must sacrifice it. And now, after having been long on the way in this fashion, we Argonauts of the ideal, more courageous perhaps than prudent, and often enough shipwrecked and brought to grief, nevertheless dangerously healthy, always healthy again, it would seem as if in recompense for it all that we have a still undiscovered country before us, the boundaries of which no one has yet seen, a beyond to all countries and corners of the ideal known hitherto, a world so overrich in the beautiful, the strange, the questionable, the frightful, and the divine, that our curiosity as well as our thirst for possession thereof have got out of hand, alas, and nothing will now any longer satisfy us. How could we still be content with the man of the present day, after such outlooks, and with such a craving in our conscience and consciousness? Sad enough, but it is unavoidable that we should look on the worthiest aims and hopes of the man of the present day with ill-concealed amusement, and perhaps should no longer look at them. Another ideal runs on before us, a strange, tempting ideal full of danger, to which we should not like to persuade anyone, because we do not so readily acknowledge anyone's right thereto. The ideal of a spirit who plays naively, that is to say, involuntarily, and from overflowing abundance and power, with everything that has hitherto been called holy, good, intangible, or divine, to whom the loftiest conception which the people have reasonably made their measure of value would already practically imply danger, ruin, abasement, or at least relaxation, blindness, or temporary self forgetfulness. The ideal of a humanly superhuman welfare and benevolence, which will often enough appear inhuman, for example, when we put alongside of all when we put alongside of all past seriousness on earth, and alongside of all past solemnities and bearing, word, tone, look, morality, and pursuit as their truest involuntary parody, and with which, nevertheless, perhaps, the great seriousness only commences when the proper interrogative mark is set up, the fate of the soul changes, the hour hand moves, and tragedy begins. The fundamental idea of my work, namely, the eternal recurrence of all things, the highest of all possible formulae of a yea-saying philosophy, first occurred to me in August 1881. I made a note of the thought on a sheet of paper with the postscript, 6,000 feet beyond men and time. That day I happened to be wandering through the woods alongside of the lake Silvaplana, and I halted beside a huge pyramidal and towering rock, not so far from Surrey. It was then that the thought struck me. Looking back now, I find that exactly 2 months previous to this inspiration, I had an omen of its coming in the form of a sudden and decisive alteration in my tastes, more particularly in music. It would even be possible to consider all Zarathustra as a musical composition. At all events, a very necessary condition in its production was a renaissance in myself of the art of hearing. In a small mountain resort near Vicenza, where I spent the spring of 1881, I and my friend and maestro Peter Gast, also one who had been born again, discovered that the phoenix music that hovered over us wore lighter and brighter plumes than it had done theretofore. During the month of August 1881, my brother resolved to reveal the teaching of the eternal recurrence in dithyrambic and psalmodic form through the mouth of Zarathustra. Among the notes of this period, we find a page on which is written the first definite plan of Thus Spake Zarathustra. Midday and eternity, guideposts to a new way of living. Beneath this is written, Zarathustra, born on Lake Ermi, left his home in his 30th year, went into the province of Arya, and during 10 years of solitude in the mountains composed the Zendavesta. The sun of knowledge stands once more at midday, and the serpent of eternity lies coiled in its light. It is your time, ye midday brethren. All right, I'm going to now read the prologue of Thus Spake Zarathustra. Zarathustra's Prologue. 1. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home in the lake of his home, and he went into the mountains. There he enjoyed his spirit and solitude, and for 10 years did not weary of it. But at last his heart changed, and rising one morning with the rosy dawn, he went before the sun, and he spake thus unto it, Thou great star, what would be thy happiness if thou hadst not those for whom thou shinest? For 10 years hast thou climbed hither unto my cave. Thou wouldst have wearied of thy light and of the journey, had it not been for me, mine eagle, and my serpent. But we awaited thee every morning, took from thee thine overflow, and blessed thee for it. Lo, I am weary of my wisdom, like the bee that had gathered too much honey. I need hands outstretched to take it. I would fain bestow and distribute until the wise have once more become joyous in their folly, and the poor happy in their riches. Therefore must I descend into the deep, as thou doest in the evening, when thou goest behind the sea, and givest light also to the netherworld, thou exuberant star. Like thee must I go down, as men say, to whom I shall descend. Bless me, then, thou tranquil eye, that canst behold even the greatest happiness without envy. Bless the cup that is about to overflow, that water may flow golden out of it, and carry everywhere the reflection of thy bliss. Lo, the cup is again going to be empty itself, and Zarathustra is again going to be a man. Thus began Zarathustra's downgoing. 2. Zarathustra went down the mountain alone, no one meeting him. When he entered the forest, however, there suddenly stood before him an old man, who had left his holy cot to seek roots. And thus spake the old man to Zarathustra: No stranger to me is this wanderer. Many years ago passed he by. Zarathustra he was called, but he hath altered. Then thou carriest thine ashes into the mountains. Wilt thou now carry thy fire into the valleys? Fearest thou not the incendiary's doom? Yea, I recognize Zarathustra. Pure is his eye, and no loathing lurketh about his mouth. Goeth he not along like a dancer? Altered is Zarathustra, a child has Zarathustra become. An awakened one is Zarathustra. What wilt thou do in the land of the sleepers? As in the sea hast thou lived in solitude, and it hath borne thee up. Alas, wilt thou now go ashore? Alas, wilt thou again drag thy body thyself? Zarathustra answered, I love mankind. Why, said the saint, did I go into the forest and the desert? Was it not because I loved men far too well? Now I love God. Men I do not love. Man is a thing too imperfect for me. Love to man would be fatal to me. Zarathustra answered, What spake I of love? I am bringing gifts unto men. Give them nothing, said the saint. Take rather part of their load and carry it along with them. That will be most agreeable unto them, if only it be agreeable unto thee. If, however, thou wilt give unto them, give them no more than an alms, and let them also beg for it. No, replied Zarathustra, I give no alms. I am not poor enough for that. The saint laughed at Zarathustra and spake thus: Then see to it that they accept thy treasures. They are distrustful of anchorites, and do not believe that we come with gifts. The fall of our footsteps ringeth too hollow through their streets, and just as at night, when they are in bed and hear a man abroad long before sunrise, so they ask themselves concerning us, Where goeth the thief? Go not to men, but stay in the forest. Go rather to the animals. Why not be like me, a bear amongst bears, a bird amongst birds? And that doeth the saint in the forest. And what doeth the saint in the forest? Asked Zarathustra. The saint answered, I make hymns and sing them. And in making hymns I laugh and weep and mumble. Thus do I praise God. With singing, weeping, laughing, and mumbling do I praise the God who is my God. But what dost thou bring us as a gift? When Zarathustra had heard these words, he bowed to the saint and said, What should I have to give thee? Let me rather hurry hence, lest I take aught away from thee. And thus they parted from one another, the old man and Zarathustra, laughing like schoolboys. When Zarathustra was alone, however, he said to his heart, Could it be possible this old saint in the forest hath not yet heard of it, that God is dead? 3. When Zarathustra arrived at the nearest town which adjoineth the forest, he found many people assembled in the marketplace. For it had been announced that a rope dancer would give a performance, and Zarathustra spake thus unto the people: I teach you the Superman. Man is something that is to be surpassed. What have ye done to surpass man? All beings hitherto have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of that great tide, and would rather go back to the beast than surpass man? What is the ape to man? A laughingstock, a thing of shame. And just the same shall man be the Superman, a laughingstock, a thing of shame. The Superman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the Superman shall be the meaning of the earth. I conjure you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and believe not those who speak unto you of super-earthly hopes. Poisoners are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying ones and poisoned ones themselves, of whom the earth is weary. So away with them. Once blasphemy against God was the greatest blasphemy, but God died, and therewith also those blasphemers. To blaspheme the earth is now the dreadfulest sin, and to rate the heart of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. Once the soul looked contemptuously on the body, and then that contempt was the supreme thing. The soul wished the body meager, ghastly, and famished. Thus it thought to escape from the body and the earth. Oh, that the soul was itself meager, ghastly, and famished, and cruelty was the delight of that soul. But ye also, my brethren, tell me, what doth your body say about your soul? Is your soul not poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency? Verily, a polluted stream is man. One must be a sea to receive a polluted stream without becoming impure. Lo, I teach you the Superman. He is that sea. In him can your great contempt be submerged. What is the greatest thing ye can experience? It is the hour of great contempt, the hour in which even your happiness becometh loathsome unto you, and so also your reason and virtue. The hour when you say, what good is my happiness? It is poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency, but my happiness should justify existence itself. The hour when ye say, what good is my reason? Doth it long for knowledge as the lion for his food? It is poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency. The hour when ye say, what good is my virtue? As yet it hath not made me passionate. How weary I am of my good and my bad. It is all poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency. The hour when ye say, what good is my justice? I do not see that I am fervor and fuel. The just, however, are fervor and fuel. The hour when ye say, what good is my pity? Is not pity the cross on which he is nailed who loveth man? But my pity is not a crucifixion. Have ye ever spoken thus? Have ye ever cried thus? Ah, would that I had heard you crying thus. It is not your sin, it is your self-satisfaction that crieth unto heaven. Your very sparingness in sin crieth unto heaven. Where is the lightning to lick you with its tongue? Where is the frenzy with which ye should be inoculated? Lo, I teach you the Superman. He is that lightning. He is that frenzy. When Zarathustra had thus spoken, one of the people called out, we have now heard enough of the rope dancer. It is time now for us to see him. And all the people laughed at Zarathustra. But the rope dancer, who thought the words applied to him, began his performance. 4. Zarathustra, however, looked at the people and wondered. Then he spake thus, man is a rope, wretched between the animal and the Superman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. I love those who know not how to live except as downgoers, for they are the overgoers. I love the great despisers because they are the great adorers and arrows of longing for the other shore. I love those who do not first seek a reason beyond the stars for going down and being sacrifices, but sacrifice themselves to the earth, that the earth of the Superman may hereafter arrive. I love him who liveth in order to know, and seeketh to know in order that the Superman may hereafter live. Thus seeketh he his own downgoing. I love him who laboreth and inventeth, that he may build the house of the Superman, and prepare for him earth, animal, and plant, for thus seeketh he his own downgoing. I love him who loveth his virtue, for virtue is the will to downgoing, and an arrow of longing. I love him who reserveth no share of spirit for himself, but wanteth to be wholly the spirit of his virtue. Thus walketh he as spirit over the bridge. I love him who maketh his virtue his inclination and destiny. Thus, for the sake of his virtue, he is willing to live on, or live no more. I love him who desireth not too many virtues. One virtue is more of a virtue than two, because it is more of a knot for one's destiny to cling to. I love him whose soul is lavish, who wanteth no thanks, and doth not give back, for he always bestoweth, and desireth not to keep for himself. I love him who is ashamed when the dice fall in his favor, and who then asketh, am I a dishonest player? For he is willing to succumb. I love him who scattereth golden words in advance of his deeds, and always doeth more than he promiseth, for he seeketh his own downgoing. I love him who justifieth the future ones, and redeemeth the past ones, for he is willing to succumb through the present ones. I love him who chasteneth his God, because he loveth his God, for he must succumb through the wrath of his God. I love him whose soul is deep even in the wounding, and may succumb through a small matter, thus goeth he willingly over the bridge. I love him whose soul is so overfull that he forgetteth himself, and all things are in him, thus all things become his downgoing. I love him who is a free spirit and a free heart, thus is he head only the bowels of his heart. His heart, however, causeth his downgoing. I love all who are like heavy drops of falling one by one out of the dark cloud that lowereth over man. They herald the coming of the lightning and succumb as heralds. Lo, I am a herald of the lightning, and a heavy drop out of the cloud. The lightning, however, is the Superman. 5. When Zarathustra, this is intense, by the way, so I'm really feeling this. Anyway, when Zarathustra had spoken these words, he again looked at the people and was silent. There they stand, said he to his heart. There they laugh. They understand me not. I am not the mouth for these ears. Must one first batter their ears, that they may learn to hear with their eyes? Must one clatter like kettle drums and penitential preachers, or do they only believe the stammerer? They have nothing whereof they are proud. What do they call it? That which maketh them proud, culture they call it. It distinguisheth them from the goat herds. Hey, the goat herds, I run with the goats. Just kidding. They dislike, therefore, to hear of contempt of themselves, so I will appeal to their pride. I will speak unto them of the most contemptible thing, that however is the last man. And thus spake Zarathustra unto the people. It is time for man to fix his goal. It is time for man to plant the germ of his highest hope. Still is his soil rich enough for it, but the soil will one day be poorer and exhausted, and no lofty tree will any longer be able to grow thereon. Alas, there cometh a time when man will no longer launch the arrow of his longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have unlearned to whiz. I tell you, one must still have chaos in one to give birth to a dancing star. I tell you, ye still have chaos in you. Alas, there cometh a time when man will no longer give birth to any star. Alas, there cometh a time of the most despicable man, who can no longer despise himself. Lo, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asketh the last man, and blinketh. The earth hath then become small, and on it there hopeth the last man, who maketh everything small. His species is eradicable, like that of the ground flea. The last man liveth longest. We have discovered happiness, say the last man, and blink thereby. They have left the regions where it is hard to live, for they need warmth. One still loveth one's neighbor, and rubbeth against him, for one needeth warmth. Turning ill and being distrustful, they consider sinful, they walk warily. He is a fool who still stumbleth over stones of men. A little poison now and then that maketh pleasant dreams, and much poison is last for a pleasant death. One still worketh, for work is a pastime, but one is careful lest the pastime should hurt one. One no longer becometh poor or rich, both are too burdensome. Who still wanteth to rule? Who still wanteth to obey? Both are too burdensome. No shepherd, and one herd. Every one wanteth the same, every one is equal. He who hath other sentiments goeth voluntarily into the madhouse. Formerly all the world was insane, say the subtlest of them, and blink thereby. They are clever, and know all that hath happened, so there is no end to their raillery. People still fall out, but are soon reconciled, otherwise it spoileth their stomachs. They have their little pleasures for the day, and their little pleasures for the night, but they have a regard for health. We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and blink thereby. And here endeth the first discourse of Zarathustra, which is also called the Prologue. For at this point The shouting and mirth of the multitude interrupted him. Give us this last man, O Zarathustra. They called out, make us into these last men. Then we will make thee a present of the Superman. And all the people exulted and smacked their lips. Zarathustra, however, turned sad and said to his heart, they understand me not. I am not the mouth for these ears. Too long, perhaps, have I lived in the mountains. Too much have I hearkened unto the brooks and trees. Now do I speak unto them as unto the goatherds. Calm is my soul and clear, like the mountain in the morning. But they think me cold and a mocker with terrible jests. And now do they look at me and laugh. And while they laugh, they hate me too. There is ice in their laughter. I can only say I know the journey of the camel, the raising of the lion, and the wrestling with the serpent, and the freedom of the child. I lived that pattern before I knew that Nietzsche had laid that journey out. That's kind of his hero's journey. That's interesting to me. Man is a dangerous animal. 10. This had Zarathustra said to his heart when the sun stood at noontide. Then he looked inquiringly aloft, for he heard above him the sharp call of a bird, and behold, an eagle swept through the air in wide circles, and on it hung a serpent, not like a prey, but like a friend, for it kept itself coiled around the eagle's neck. They are mine animals, said Zarathustra, and rejoiced in his heart. The proudest animal under the sun, and the wisest animal under the sun. They have come out to recontour. They want to know whether Zarathustra still liveth. Verily, do I still live? More dangerous have I found it among men than among animals. In dangerous paths goeth Zarathustra. Let mine animals lead me. When Zarathustra had said this, he remembered the words of the saint in the forest. Then he sighed and spake thus to his heart. Would that I were wiser. Would that I were wise from the very heart, like my serpent. But I am asking the impossible. Therefore do I ask my pride to go always with my wisdom. And if my wisdom should some day forsake me, alas, it loveth to fly away. May my pride then fly with my folly. Thus began Zarathustra's downgoing. All in my useless commentary. With a song that I really like. The lightning. The fire. And so what I think this has to do with what's happening right now in the world is just, I think that I feel that these eschatons, these religious apocalypses, these secular doomsday scenarios, these dystopian horrors that are predicted, I just feel that we have to grab a hold of ourselves. That is the true nihilism. To live with some prophecy or some awaiting some eschaton return of some salvation, when I think Nietzsche realized that he was his own salvation. The lightning was he said he was a heavy drop. I think he was more than that. To me, I live in this world, and my work is my pastime. But I'll tell you, or I pass the time with work. But this is an unreality. This culture is unreal. It wants to destroy the individual. It wants to, and that's just not going to happen. My animals came to me too. I'm sure just silly coincidences with Nietzsche, or maybe when we go down, maybe it's a common experience in consciousness to descend, and we find that we have to strike out into the desert. And by the way, today is the beginning of 40 days in the desert. And I'll see you guys on the other side. I'm not going to be posting anything really. But until January 20th, when Biden is to hopefully be sworn in, we'll see what happens. But I think we're going into a desert here maybe a little bit. So drink up, be super healthy, and watch yourself out there. Peace.
This is to end in fire, then we shall all burn together. Watch the flames climb high into the night, calling out Father, oh, stand by and we will watch the flames burn all along the mountainside. And if we should die tonight, we should all die together. Raise a glass of wine for the last time, calling out Father, oh, prepare as we will watch the flames burn all along the mountainside. Desolation comes upon the sky. I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire burning the trees. And I see fire hollow souls. I see fire burning the breeze. I hope that you remember me. Desolation comes upon the sky. And I see